I want to start by saying this is a hard moment, and we in Washington are so strong because of the many elected officials who are here today and others who weren't able to join us today. Thank you to the elected officials who are joining us today. Thank you, too, for the community leaders who are here with us and the people who are affected by this big, bad budget bill that was just passed by the federal government. That bill is unconscionable. It destroys the safety net that Washington people and families depend on across the board. So my role as Planned Parenthood's representative is to talk about the ways in which it affects reproductive health. This bill absolutely attacks both Planned Parenthood and the patients that we serve in ways that are completely politically motivated and don't serve any interest except to further political goals. Patients at Planned Parenthood don't have other places to go to receive high-quality, non-judgmental health care that they get at our clinics. And I want to say to you that this hit is huge. Preventing Medicaid patients from seeking care at Planned Parenthood is frankly ridiculous. Washington State has consistently invested heavily in assuring that people have access to care and other safety net services in our state. Washington State is deeply affected by this bill as a result of our state's values and our state's investments that have been moved forward by many of the elected officials who are here today. Planned Parenthood is undaunted. We will always seek ways to serve our patients, but Washington State is facing its own budget crisis. We already saw a cut to abortion services in this last year's budget, as well as many other services that Washingtonians depend on because of our budget crisis. This is not the moment when the federal government should be coming in and interfering with our state's values and with our patients' access to badly needed health care. We are here for our patients. We are undaunted, but it does take money to provide care, and this is a hit on Planned Parenthood and on our state. So I am more than honored to be joined by many other folks who are going to talk about these hits today, but I'm particularly honored to introduce our next speaker, Governor Bob Ferguson.
First, thanks to Jennifer and everybody who works and volunteers here at Planned Parenthood and Planned Parenthoods across our state and country. We so appreciate your important service for the people of our state. First, I just want to start by saying I think, Jennifer, you summed it up pretty well, that this big betrayal of a bill, I think you used the phrase, essentially guts our, safety net here for many Washingtonians. And that was literally the first line of my comments, right? And because that is really what this bill effectively does. So I want to be very clear about what this big betrayal of the bill will do. People in Washington State will go hungry because of this bill. They will lose access to health care because of this bill. Our lowest income residents will be worse off as a result of this bill. Why? All to pay for tax breaks for the wealthiest Americans. That's why this is happening. It's difficult to overstate how devastating these cuts will be to Washingtonians. They will bring our health care system to the brink and harm people in every corner of our state. I want to point out that Washington State will be among the states hit hardest by Medicaid cuts and changes. We were at the forefront of expanding health care coverage, thanks in large part to a lot of the hard work of people here, legislators, community activists, Governor Inslee, and many others over the years. We're at the forefront of expanding health care coverage to more individuals under the Affordable Care Act. This effectively reverses all of that progress. One other thing I want to emphasize is the legislators who are here and statewide officials understand, and our state treasurer understands, is about 28% of our state budget comes from federal dollars. That is not unusual for states across the country. A big part of the budget that we implement every year comes from federal dollars. So to give you an example, on the Medicaid cuts from this big betrayal of the bill, that will be at least a $3 billion annual hit to Medicaid funding in Washington State. At least 250,000 Washingtonians will lose Medicaid coverage. Another 150,000 will be priced out of the healthcare exchange. Hospitals in Washington State will lose at least $1.5 billion in reimbursements in 2031. And I want to emphasize this. You may not be on Medicaid. You may not depend on Medicaid, but guess what? The hospital you go to, they depend on those reimbursements. Hospitals, both rural and urban, will close as a result of this. That's not just coming from me. That's national organizations that made this clear for hospitals across the country. UW-Medicine will take a major hit, losing at least $330 million every single year. 2/3 of that from Harborview Medical Center. That means services at the state's top trauma center, a hospital that provides life-saving care, not just to people in our state, but Alaska, Montana, and Idaho, are threatened. Rural Washingtonians who rely disproportionately on Medicaid, especially children, will be especially hard hit. Cuts to SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, also disproportionately impacts rural Washingtonians. Just to give you one example, about 74,000 Washingtonians in Yakima County, more than a quarter of the population, rely on SNAP for food assistance. About 1 in 4 Washingtonians, Grace Harbor, Asotin, and Adams counties use SNAP. We're here at Planned Parenthood, so I want to also mention, there are so many aspects of this big betrayal of the bill, and the Congresswoman will chat about this as well. But one more I want to highlight in particular, because we're here at Planned Parenthood, is in this big betrayal of the bill, and Jennifer alluded to this, that bill intentionally targets Planned Parenthood and other similar healthcare providers that offer reproductive health care. It includes a 1-year moratorium on Medicaid funding for Planned Parenthood. By the way, that went in effect immediately upon the bill signing. This is not like a year and a half in the future. That was an immediate thing. So we had conversations right away when this was going on. So in Washington state, Planned Parenthood receives at least $22 million a year in Medicaid funding, at least $11 million of that from the federal government. Medicaid is the primary payer for Planned Parenthood. Many of the patients who visit Planned Parenthood are on Medicaid, making Planned Parenthood one of Washington's preeminent Medicaid providers. So that funding has been cut immediately. There is a lawsuit brought by Planned Parenthood. They've had a successful, as I understand that litigation, they were successful in getting a TRO, a temporary restraining order. That litigation will be ongoing. But that important funding, that critical funding, is certainly at risk. And so as governor, one thing I have spoken to Planned Parenthood leadership about, with Jennifer about, is that if they are unsuccessful in that litigation, Washington state will step up to backfill those dollars. That is critically important for us to do right now. And I look forward to working with our legislative leaders as we grapple with this moving forward and other issues as well. But one thing we have to do is make sure that individuals in our state have access to the critical services provided by Planned Parenthood. And this is something we can do. So I'm working with leaders at the Healthcare Authority. We're going to take some resources from the Healthcare Authority and divert those resources to make sure we're adequately funding Planned Parenthood during this very challenging time. I guess I'll just say is, I've been in politics 20 years, right? I feel like I've seen a lot in 20 years. I mean, this is about as bad as it gets from a policy standpoint, from a budget standpoint. It is sometimes difficult to find the words. It really is, right? It really is sometimes difficult to find the words to communicate just how cruel and wrong something is. But this bill, my God, the impacts will be affecting Washingtonians for years. There is no way to sugarcoat this, everybody, for years. And, one thing I'm thankful for is we have organizations like Planned Parenthood, leaders like Jennifer and folks who work with her, legislative leaders, statewide officials who are here today, who share our values as Washingtonians to make sure during this extremely challenging time for our country, and that is an understatement, that we're all going to work together and lean into this and do everything we can to preserve core services for the people of our state. With that, I want to turn this back to Jennifer.
Thank you, Governor. I just briefly want to say thank you to Governor Ferguson, and thank you to the leaders in Washington who I know will be working against these, the governor said it right, these incredibly cruel cuts to care, to reproductive health care, and to so many other parts of the service safety net that the neediest Washingtonians depend on. It is incredibly heartening to know that Governor Ferguson and our state stands against patients losing access to care at Planned Parenthood during this coming year, and there's so much more left to do. We're so lucky we have fighters working on that, including someone I've had the privilege of working with since she was a state senator, actively working on access to reproductive health care and so many other issues that affect people across our state. It is now my privilege to introduce Congresswoman Jayapal.
Thank you so much, Jen. Thank you to Planned Parenthood, to all the advocates, to all the workers who are making sure that we preserve access to health care for people across Washington state. Governor Ferguson, thank you for your leadership. Thank you to the state legislature also for just stepping up in these times. I know how difficult this is, and I am so proud to be from Washington state, where we have leaders at every level that are committed and dedicating to making sure that our Washingtonians get access. Look, the Republican defunding of Planned Parenthood was very specific in the bill. The way the language was written, there was only one organization that was targeted, and it was an attack not just on reproductive freedom, it was an attack on the millions of Americans who rely on these health centers for critical services, from cancer treatments to STI screenings. And thanks to our protections in Washington state, it's important to remember that these facilities aren't just serving Washingtonians, by the way. We have people who are coming from other states where reproductive freedoms have been dramatically curtailed, coming here to our clinics. Now, thanks to the Republicans' cruel targeting of Planned Parenthood, patients are going to have to travel farther. They're going to have to wait longer to get care as rural health services close or cut back on services. And that's why, Governor, your actions to fund Planned Parenthood here in Washington state will save lives. I want to talk about the big bad betrayal bill in total. It is the most cruel piece of legislation that I have ever seen. It is the most detrimental bill that I have ever seen in my time in Congress that will affect everyday people's lives on every level. There's so much in this bill, it's actually difficult to figure out what exactly to focus on, but I do want to say that it will leave Americans sicker and poorer. That's the bottom line. The most vulnerable will suffer, and 17 million Americans will lose health care between the cuts to Medicaid, almost $1 trillion, and the cuts to the Affordable Care Act. Here in Washington state, as the governor said, more than 300,000 Washingtonians stand to lose their insurance. Our Medicaid program is called Apple Health. Sometimes I meet Washingtonians who say, I'm not on Medicaid, I'm on Apple Health. Let me be clear. It's great branding from the state. We have good communicators, but Apple Health is Medicaid. And thanks to the big bad betrayal bill, our state will lose up to between $31 and $51 billion over the next 10 years in federal Medicaid dollars. That jeopardizes the health care of 1 in 5 Washingtonians. At the same time, the big bad betrayal bill slashes about $300 billion in the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. And for people who don't know what SNAP is, that is basic food for the hungry. And it's $2 a meal. That's all we give people on SNAP, but these are folks that are hungry in our state, across our country. Here in Washington, every single hungry Washingtonian family that relies on SNAP will see their benefits decrease, even as grocery prices go up. And 130,000 Washingtonians are estimated to lose access to SNAP completely due to so-called work requirements. And I put the air quotes around work requirements because it's important to know that what research has told us over a decade of research is that people who are on SNAP who can work are already working. And all these bureaucratic requirements do is kick hungry people off of assistance. The big bad betrayal bill also ends or limits dramatically the student loan repayment programs that Democrats worked so hard to put in place, leaving students and their parents on the hook for thousands more just to get an education. And it ends the clean energy tax credits that Democrats worked so hard to put into the Inflation Reduction Act, killing more than 1 million jobs and driving our energy prices up. So you have to ask yourself, why? Why do all of this? And let me be very clear. It is to deliver the largest tax break to the wealthiest millionaires and billionaires that we have ever seen. It increases the deficit by about $3.5 trillion, and it adds $5 trillion to the debt. It is, simply put, the largest transfer of wealth from working Americans and poor Americans to the very richest that we have ever seen. And the big bad betrayal bill makes our wealth and income inequality even worse in our already regressive tax state. The top 1% in Washington will receive an average tax cut of $90,000, while the bottom 20% will get $200 in 2026. Remember that the tax cuts for the wealthiest are permanent. The tax cuts for the very tiny tax cuts for the working class expire in 2 to 3 years, depending on which one we're talking about. So as working families, you are going to be paying more for health care, for food, leading to essentially a tax increase for most Americans. Trump and Republicans want you to accept crumbs while they give gold bars to the billionaires. And that's why every single Democrat in the House voted no, and it's why this bill is incredibly unpopular. It's also why actions like Governor Ferguson is taking are so important. We have to do everything we can to help families who are going to lose so much in this betrayal bill, and we have to stand up for the ability of all Americans to have a decent and dignified life. And I promise you that as difficult as this seems, I am not backing down from a fight. Democrats are not backing down from a fight. We are going to do everything we can to make sure that Americans, first of all, understand what's in this bill, and secondly, that we take back the House next year and we stop all of this damage that is happening across the country. I've had the great honor of meeting with constituents across our district and the frontline advocates that are providing services to people, and I'm proud to be joined today by two incredible advocates who are going to share their stories of how this big bad betrayal bill affects them. Becky Bisbee is a board member at the ARC of King County and At Work, a supported employment agency. She's the mother of an adult daughter with significant intellectual and developmental disabilities who is on Medicaid. Carmen Smith is the executive director of the White Center Food Bank, and both Carmen and Becky stand to be deeply impacted, and I'm just so grateful that they are willing to share their stories and the stories of those they serve today. I'll turn it over to Becky first.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Jayapal. Good morning. My name is Becky Bisbee. I'm here to share the story of my daughter, Paige, and how important Medicaid is to us. Paige has significant intellectual and developmental disabilities as a result of a rare genetic condition. 31 years ago, when the doctors delivered that news to me and her dad, the medical information was scary. Not that long before, we would have been advised to place her in an institution and get on with our lives. We brought Paige home. Her early years included lots of doctor appointments and uncertainty. Would she need surgery or have seizures? Would she talk or walk? Would she be able to care for herself? Would she be able to live on her own? We made sure that she did typical kid things like attend school and participate in rec programs, in addition to the speech and physical therapies. She enjoys listening to music, playing with stuffed animals and baby dolls, and hanging out with family and friends. Paige is a social butterfly. When we go out in public, Paige is the one that most people will say hi to. Soon after completing the school-to-work transition program, she was hired at a Bellevue law firm. She works 2 hours a month, delivering snacks and office supplies to her coworkers who appreciate her determination. She also attends a day program for adults. In 2 weeks, she'll be going to an overnight summer camp. Today, her dad and I have bigger concerns about Paige's future than what we faced 3 decades ago. She requires support for every aspect of daily living. What happens once we are no longer in Paige's life? We thought the social safety net created decades ago would be there for Paige. Today, we're not so sure. Paige receives food stamps, SNAP, through Medicaid. It's not a lot, but it's something. Paige receives support from a job coach through Medicaid. Paige receives personal care in a shoreline home she shares with 2 women through Medicaid. Paige receives incontinence supplies through Medicaid. Paige receives health care, Apple Health, through Medicaid. Medicaid is Paige's lifeline. Without it, her quality of life, not just her health, is jeopardized. Her monthly Social Security check and minimum wage job could never cover her basic needs. Medicaid is too important to her life and to all our lives to dismantle and degrade. Please help us reverse this devastating legislation that threatens us all. Thank you. And I'll turn it over to Carmen of the Food Bank.
Thanks, Becky. Hi, everyone. My name is Carmen. I'm the Executive Director at White Center Food Bank. Thanks for giving me a few minutes to speak about the impacts of the SNAP cuts in the so-called Big Bad Bill. We've seen how SNAP cuts play out in real time. Back in March 2023, when the COVID-related boost to SNAP dropped, our food bank saw an immediate 30% increase in family visits, and that is an increase that has continued to persist. In 2024, visits rose another 43%, and this year we're already 22% over this time last year. Compared to 2019, we're at a 200% increase in family visits. And this isn't a temporary spike. It's become the new normal, and it isn't something unique to White Center Food Bank. It's a trend we are seeing across Washington State and across the nation, and it's telling us loud and clear that our communities need more support, not less. And this isn't just about numbers, it's about real people. My own mother is one of them. She sacrificed to give me everything, and she's on SNAP. During COVID, as a single senior household, her SNAP benefit was just $180 a month. That's not a lot, but it made a difference. Today, her benefit is just $90. That's only $3 a day. Think about feeding yourself, let alone in a way that's meaningful to you, on just $3 a day. And now, the Big Bad Bill, her benefit could be cut another $40 to $60 a month. That would leave her with just $1 or $2 per day to eat. This is the reality that we're forcing on millions of people like her. And we know what works. After the COVID stimulus checks and expanded SNAP and the child tax credit, food insecurity dropped 18% in just 2 weeks. Families used that money to buy food. 80% of stimulus funds and nearly half of tax credit payments went straight to groceries. When people have resources, they prioritize their health and well-being, as well as the health and well-being of their families. But now, with these SNAP cuts, we're watching any sense of stability disappear. Families are already making difficult decisions. They are already letting the rent eat first. These cuts will lead to even more difficult choices. More and more people will turn to food banks like ours, which will continue to put a strain on our organizations and push us to our limits, all because the system has failed. These cuts are not just numbers in a budget. These are real decisions with real consequences that impact real people, and we cannot pretend that we don't know better, because we do. Thank you, Congresswoman Jayapal and Governor Ferguson, for standing up for Washingtonians when so much is being taken away from us. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen and Becky, for sharing your stories here today. My name is Britta Lund, and I'm the Northgate Health Center Manager for Planned Parenthood here in Washington. The budget bill just signed by President Trump is, as we know, one of the most devastating attacks on healthcare access in American history. By banning Planned Parenthood from seeing Medicaid patients, the bill targets my organization and the patients who rely on us for care every day. The people who passed this bill want Planned Parenthood health centers to close. They want people to lose their access to affordable health care. And for too many people, it's access to health care altogether. Nearly 40% of our affiliates' patients in Western Washington are Medicaid recipients. This is about so much more than abortion, which we all know is already not covered by federal Medicaid dollars. This money goes to birth control, cancer screenings, STI testing, all of which are now at risk, even more. Every single day at the health center that I manage in Northgate, we help people sign up for Apple Health and Medicaid. We don't just offer medical care at my clinic. We ask our patients a few screening questions, and if they qualify, we help them enroll in the program, because when they walked through our doors, they didn't have insurance, and some didn't even know that it was an option available to them. With the implementation of this bill, hospitals will close, clinics will close, long-term care facilities will close, and everyone, as mentioned several times already, everyone will be punished, not just Medicaid recipients. People will have worse health outcomes, people will die of preventable illnesses, the list goes on. For those of us, like myself, who work in healthcare, we have one common goal, and that's to help people. Just yesterday morning, I had a special encounter that reminded me of how special our Planned Parenthood community truly is. I walked into an exam room at my clinic and introduced myself as I have thousands of times before. I asked the same routine questions to my patient before performing an ultrasound. Then what struck me was that this patient looked me straight in the eye and said, "How are you?" They said it in such a way that made me feel that they were trying to take the weight off of my shoulders. But that's Planned Parenthood. We're not a transactional organization. We are a beloved community, one that is rooted in respect, integrity, and trust. Here I was feeling like I'm carrying the burden for my patients, when my patient sitting right in front of me is worried about me. It's not right that Planned Parenthood, our patients, and our providers are being targeted simply because we believe that every person should have access to the care they need when they need it. I often remind my friends and colleagues that everyone loves somebody who's had an abortion, and some folks have a hard time grasping that reality. I should not have to convince anybody that everyone loves someone who has needed to access healthcare services in their life. They can change whatever laws they want, but they cannot change the fact that everyone needs healthcare. And that's why I'm so thankful to Governor Ferguson and the state of Washington for stepping up to take care of patients in our state who rely on Medicaid. It shouldn't have to fall on you, but we are truly fortunate to live in a state where our leaders care. And my colleagues in other states really should not have a different experience. Thanks so much for having me today. And Governor Ferguson, if you want to welcome me back.
So first, on behalf of Congresswoman Jayapal and myself, please join me in thanking our three speakers for stepping up and sharing their stories. And we're happy to take a few questions. What I'll do, Congresswoman, is maybe repeat the questions. I know it's a little background noise just so folks who are listening can hear the questions, and then obviously feel free to jump right in. So, yes, go ahead. And sorry, John, I'll go to you next. Go for it. Yeah.
Sure, yeah. The budget, you have to pass a balanced budget, unlike the folks in the other Washington. Where are you going to find the money in a very tight budget for what you're proposing to, or what you're promising?
I'll repeat the question just for folks in here. So the question is, basically, the state of Washington, unlike the federal government, does have to adopt a balanced budget. So that is true. Thanks to the work of the legislators here, we did adopt a balanced budget, unlike the federal government. The Republican Congress, which I think it was more than $3 trillion added to our debt, if I remember correctly. The question is, hey, where are we going to find the money for this? So what we've been doing is, since I first had a conversation with Jennifer, I think as it became clear this might be happening, we've taken a look on our budget side, and for a short-term gap like this, what we'll be doing is going to our healthcare authority. They have a large budget. This is about half of 1% of their budget is the millions we would need to backfill this. So we'll go there for right now to get that temporary funding to get us through this period of time. Again, I do want to emphasize, thankfully, the litigation brought by Planned Parenthood has been successful so far, right? So right now the funding, correct me if I'm wrong, but the funding has the bad part of that bill that relates to cutting off Planned Parenthood has been stopped by a temporary restraining order. But if ultimately that were to change, yes, we're prepared to step up and backfill those dollars. I also just want to be clear, as long as we're talking about the budget, is, look, we're talking about billions of dollars in cuts to Medicaid. It's just one example. The state of Washington does not have billions of dollars lying around every year to backfill that. So as governor, one thing is we're grappling with what we're seeing coming from this budget and other actions in Congress is making sure we do what we can to mitigate those harms. And if the dollar amounts are, on a relative sense, somewhat smaller and manageable, We'll do what we can to manage those, and also looking at what exactly is the harm. And obviously here with cuts to Planned Parenthood, those, for all the reasons you've heard, I just consider it to be so devastating that we want to backfill those dollars. John?
Two questions, for Governor Ferguson and one for A.G. Brown.
Great.
I want to follow up on his question. I think you mentioned earlier, someone mentioned earlier that the cuts will hit $3 billion. It would be a $3 billion annual hit.
At least.
On the state's Medicaid coverage. That's $3 billion, not millions.
Correct.
Is a 0.5% dive into the healthcare authority, is that even remotely adequate? It seems like $3 billion would be a much heavier lift than how you're describing
So to be
it.
clear, the dollars that are coming from the healthcare authority, that will specifically backfill the cut in the big bad bill that cuts Planned Parenthood. And that cut goes into effect immediately. Unlike the Medicaid cuts, which are a little bit down the road, right? So in other words, what we're doing is, if that lawsuit is not successful, brought by Planned Parenthood, they will immediately experience those millions of dollars in cuts. So what I'm saying today is I are taking dollars from the healthcare authority, looking at their budget, pulling dollars there and making them available to backfill that cut from the federal government in this bill. So that does not go to Medicaid cuts of billions of dollars. That's my whole point is, hey, in a very targeted way, we can address this specific harm that may be coming to Planned Parenthood.
So does that mean you'll have to, next session, you're going to have to dig up a couple $1 billion from somewhere?
No, I think that's what I just said is, when we're looking at potential cuts to things like, not potential, we're looking at the cuts to things like SNAP or Medicaid, we are talking billions of dollars every single year. Billions of dollars. The state of Washington does not have billions of dollars lying around to backfill those, and we are not alone. You look at what governors are saying all across the country, they're saying the same thing. We don't have the dollars as a state to backfill the loss to Medicaid cuts, to SNAP cuts, and other things we're seeing. This, in contrast, and I'll turn to you, Congresswoman, is a contrast. This is a smaller amount targeted that we can backfill. Congresswoman?
Well, I just wanted to be clear that the way the Republicans have structured this bill is that the cuts to Medicaid start after the midterm elections.
Right.
And I want to be very clear about that. The small tax breaks for working Americans start before the midterm elections. And so the $31 to $51 billion estimate over 10 years includes the cuts that start after the elections. If we were able to take back the House, I think one of the first things we would do is roll this back. But I also want to be clear that already we are seeing rural hospitals close. We are seeing people estimating what this cut to Medicaid that starts at the end of 2026 will do. And so a lot of the cuts that we're talking about will come a little bit later, but every state in the country, every hospital in the country, every nursing home in the country is looking at what this means and making decisions right now about the care that they can provide. And for our clients, for our constituents who are on these programs, they're getting a lot of misinformation. You know, there's a Social Security provision in this, and I and maybe others who are signed up for Social Security got an email from our Social Security account saying that we were going to get a big tax break on no taxes on Social Security. That is false. We're going to put out some accurate information about what that exactly is. But I will just say that the administration is trying to sell this bill right now, even though the cuts that are in it, they might start in a year, they might start in 2 years, even though those cuts will decimate working families across this country. And nothing will make up for the breadcrumbs that people might see in the next year. So some of what we have to do is educate people about exactly what's in the bill, how these things all roll out, and what the impacts are. But we are certainly going to see impacts right now, even if those cuts don't happen until, for another year.
Nick, I think you do. Okay. Yep.
In terms of expecting this to be a rallying cry heading into the midterms, the repercussions of the bill?
It absolutely will. I mean, look, This bill is extremely unpopular if people know about it, 2-1, and that is not just Democrats, that's independents, that's Republicans. Remember that a lot of Republican states and a lot of Republican districts, actually, I think the highest share of Medicaid recipients in our state are actually in districts represented by people who are Republicans who voted for the bill. So it will absolutely be one of the big things that we're talking about. It's not just about elections, it's about people's lives. And I think we saw a very clear contrast between every single Democrat in the House and the Senate that voted against this bill. And remember that the bill passed by tiny, tiny margins. In the Senate, 3 Republicans voted against it, and J.D. Vance had to be the tiebreaker. In the House, 2 Republicans voted against it, and had we had one more, we could have killed it. And so I think that I don't understand why. I mean, I do sort of understand, but I don't understand as an elected official who's elected by my constituents, I don't understand why anybody would vote against this, because no matter what district you're in, your constituents will suffer because of these cuts.
Just unpack that a little bit more on what that looks like, if you're already working on the legislative structure for that, and also what you would also need from the Senate and from what would be President Trump.
I don't want to sugarcoat it. It's going to be hard. It depends on whether we have the Senate as well as the House. I feel, fairly confident that, my lips to God's ears, as they say, but I feel fairly confident that we will take back the House. It is very close. We're going to continue to do everything we can, but we do have some vehicles. This budget bill was used, reconciliation was used to pass this, which is essentially a way around the filibuster. And I would just remind people that when Democrats had the House, the Senate, and the White House, we used reconciliation to pass major expansions to things that help people. Including the Inflation Reduction Act, including, making pharmaceutical drugs more cost-effective for people to be able to afford them, all kinds of things. But I think that this will require, there are so many destructive actions that are happening right now, including to government agencies. And I would just say that it's very difficult to know exactly how we will get back everything that we have. But the easiest part might be the legislative rollback. The question is, how do we replace all of the damage and the destruction that's been done? We're going through those calls and conversations right now in the Democratic caucus in the House. And I know Leader Jeffries is already kind of working on what is our proactive plan. We're an opposition party, but we're also a proposition party. We have a real proposition of what equitable justice looks like for our constituents and for the American people.
Governor, you've been talking about backfilling federal dollars that are going to hurt Planned Parenthood that loss. What steps have you taken to backfill the state cut that was made to Abortion Access Fund, which was, about 50%?
Yeah, no, thanks for mentioning that, the cut on the state side. So Jennifer and I have also had many conversations about that as well. So I'm actively working with her and others, legislative leaders, to make sure in the proposed budget that we have coming up, that we make sure, especially in these times, that we adequately fund Planned Parenthood and making sure that people in Washington State have access to the full range of reproductive health care. And so I think you'll be seeing that in the supplemental budget that'll be coming out soon.
In the supplemental budget,
correct.
You weren't able to find discretionary money prior to that?
So when a budget comes to me with a cut, as governor, I can't do anything about that, right? So just want to be clear about how that works. But Jennifer and I have had multiple conversations. I know legislators had faced tough choices with their budget, but I think we're all on the same page on during this really challenging time to try and restore that funding. Yes. Sorry. Has anyone not asked a question yet? Go for it.
Is there an amount of money that you committed to potentially backfilling to Planned Parenthood? You mentioned the 25% of the Regional Healthcare Authority fund, but is there a dollar amount on that amount of money? Is there a dollar amount that you committed to potentially backfilling Planned Parenthood?
Sorry, my apologies. So sorry if I didn't mention this. My team will correct me if I get this wrong. The question is, how much is the amount of money to backfill on a short-term basis for Planned Parenthood from the cuts? And my apologies if I didn't mention, I believe the number is $11 million. I'm getting a nod from my team. So that's $11 million. So that's a one-time thing. This cut is essentially a one-year moratorium. The litigation's ongoing, a lot of moving pieces, to put it very, very mildly. So that's why we're in such close communication. But the figure was $11 million.
And then second question, do you have any response to Representative Dunbar? He challenged you last last week to a debate in Seattle to further discuss this?
The congresswoman saying why she didn't get the challenge. I've got to be honest, I haven't focused too much on his social media tweets, but maybe I'll get a chance to take a look at it. Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah. Yes, and let's do this one, then maybe we'll wrap up and invite final comments. Go for it.
Congresswoman, when cuts, happened on the state level or were proposed on the state level, a lot of folks encouraged Governor Ferguson to pass a wealth tax, including the previous governor. What do you think that Democrats should look at that closer? Do you think that he should have done that or should look at that next year?
I'm a politician, so no. Look, we are at the federal level. We are looking at how do we make the tax system more fair. What is happening right now is this incredible concentration of wealth. I do have a wealth tax proposal at the federal level. But also, if you look at what we passed in the Inflation Reduction Act, there were a number of pieces to the tax reforms that Democrats made. Everything from making sure that multinational corporations pay taxes here in the United States and can't offshore their wealth, to making sure that the wealthiest pay their fair share, to actually funding the IRS. I mean, the funding that we put into the IRS generated an enormous amount of money, allowing the IRS to crack down on the billionaires and the millionaires. I think that we have to address the incredible imbalance in the tax system. And that is, I focus obviously on the federal level. I think that the state legislators are doing what they can. I encourage everybody to look at that, because if you have a tax system that essentially channels wealth to the wealthiest, and you don't address that, you can do all these other things, but at the end of the day, you're going to end up with people not being able to accumulate the assets that allow people to just have a roof over their head and food on the table and, be able to retire with dignity and afford health care. So I know that there is a lot of discussion about what works in our state. Obviously, there's state law around taxes that has to be looked at. And I assume that all of our legislators are looking at that. I think at the federal level, we already have our full list, and we got a lot of it done. It just all got rolled back with this bill. They took every piece of tax reform that we did away. And what I would say about this bill, even relative to the 2017 TCJA, the first Trump tax scam, is that this is the first bill I've ever seen, and I've talked to people who have been in Congress for a lot longer than me, where there isn't even a tiny bit of relief for the middle class. I mean, it is really remarkable when you look at this. It's not only the extension of the TCJA tax cuts for the wealthiest, it is a whole nother set of additional tax cuts, all of which are permanent for the wealthiest in our country. It's unconscionable to me.
And just, I'll take a swing at that question. So we have legislators here and statewide elected officials. I'm pretty confident no two of us agreed exactly on how exactly to balance the budget last year. I'm sure of that. How much revenue, what kind of revenue, how much cuts. One thing everybody here and every Democrat in the legislature is united on is standing up for Planned Parenthood and standing up against this big bad betrayal of a bill. That we're united on, that's what we're working on. Any final thoughts from you, Jennifer, before we wrap up?
No, nothing except thank you to the leaders who are here, the elected leaders, and Governor Ferguson, especially in this moment, and Congresswoman Jayapal for fighting for us, even when it was a losing battle, and on into when we can win. All of our state legislators and state leaders, I just can't say thank you enough. We are lucky to be here while we face these cruel and atrocious and heartless cuts that will impact our people in Washington. We are incredibly lucky to have leaders like this fighting for us across Washington. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much.